Tomorrow, at the place where I work, some students have organized an opportunity for all of us on the campus to gather and to remember what we have lost during the last 18 months, to share what we are mourning, and to try to speak some of that out loud in the hopes of a catharsis and or a shared sense of loss. I'm really glad they're doing this. And what I'm about to share with you all is what I will say if I have an opportunity to speak tomorrow. My plan is to go. But I also have a doctor's appointment to get some stronger anti-anxiety slash sedative medication because of how not okay I am right now. So I may have to miss it. And also, I felt like this merited sharing with a larger audience than just the people who might be wandering by the amphitheater at a particular time. So let me just be really clear that I'm here to speak as Liz, a person, not as an employee of or representative of any institution or state government. These are my thoughts. I am mourning the doctors in Wuhan, China, who knew what was happening and were prevented from warning the world by their government. I'm mourning the people who died because we didn't find out about this virus as quickly as we should have. I mourn the Americans and others who found themselves trapped on cruise ships and in airplanes that landed, but they couldn't go anywhere for a really long time because they had been exposed to COVID, and that previous guy didn't want them stepping foot on American soil because he didn't want his numbers to go up, because that was more important. And the suffering that they endured because of that. I'm mourning the lives of every single person in this country and around the world who has been very ill or died because of this disease. I'm mourning for the healthcare workers and EMTs and police who had to bear the brunt of the initial hit of COVID in the United States, who had to go find people in their homes and try to take them to a hospital that might not have any room, to people in New York who had to walk by trucks that were storing the bodies of people because there was nowhere to take them after they had passed. And the trauma that the people who scrambled to try to get it under control in the earliest days of COVID, undergoing so much stress to try to keep us safe. I'm mourning those same healthcare workers who continued to put themselves, their own lives, their families' lives at risk by serving a population that sometimes denied that the disease even happened or was a thing, and yet they provided the best possible care that they could and persisted despite getting really burned out and feeling like shit most of the time. I mourn the people who died waiting for a vaccine because we didn't have the logistics of distributing them ready because the previous guy wasn't so much interested in that. I can give you a book to read if you don't believe that. I mourn the hours that I lost meeting with students in person. The classes that I sent on their way before spring break in March of 2020 saying, I'll see you in a week, stay safe. And then we never came together again, not in person. I mourn the people who gave up their spring break to try to get their classes ready for a switch to online or virtual and haven't really had an actual break since then. I mourn the hundreds of students who I wanted to be able to reach last academic year and struggled to do so because we couldn't be in the same space. And I mourn the students who we lost because they could not overcome the mental health challenges presented by this pandemic. I mourn the hours of sleep that all of us lost, trying to make sense of what was happening in this world. I mourn the loss of a great big commencement party for the class of 2020. And I mourn the loss of being able to invite my students over for a party at my house at the end of every semester since December of 2019. I mourn the healthcare workers who now are largely treating people with a disease that they could have prevented had they been willing to listen to scientists. I mourn the fact that they are once again burning the candle at both ends with no end in sight. I mourn how helpless they feel, how angry they feel, and how many of them we are likely to lose to literally any other job because of how badly we have worked together to make their job not awful. I mourn every single parent in this country who is sending their child under the age of 12 into a public school system that doesn't have the guts to demand universal masking. I mourn the parents who are making impossible choices that will impact their kids' lives. I mourn my friend whose husband nearly passed away from kidney failure before, at the last possible moment, finding a match and getting a kidney transplant. And now has to live without very much contact with his wife and two teenage daughters because any disease could threaten his life, especially COVID. I mourn the fact that he couldn't be there celebrating to the fullest extent when his oldest daughter graduated high school in May of 2020 and moved into her college dorm room because the risk was too high. And I mourn the trauma that his wife has experienced trying to keep her family safe without having someone every single night to put his arms around her and say, we're going to be okay, because they don't know. I mourn every parent who has watched their child die from COVID, sometimes through an iPad screen, no matter that child's age. I mourn the loss of Christmas with my parents in 2020 and with my in-laws. I mourn the fact that I haven't seen or hugged my in-laws in a year and a half, almost 2 years now. I mourn going to a job where I feel safe and not at risk of dying because I showed up to do my job. I mourn the fact that someone probably caught COVID where I work today. And that person might get really sick, might die, and might give it to someone else. And I mourn the family of that person who caught COVID today and their furious anger when they see us excitedly celebrating the fact that we get to be in person again. I mourn the lack of leadership at the very top of our government in the state, who is more interested in being politically correct with their voters than they are with making sure the voters don't die. I mourn the people who will because of a lack of political will and a lack of political backbone. I mourn that so many Americans live in states where they are governed by governors and state legislators who are more interested in getting elected and campaign funds than they are doing what's best for their voters. Period. It is inexcusable. And I mourn the fact that when I speak up, I get told that I should express these feelings in a more appropriate venue or in a more palatable way. I mourn the loss of energy and assistance that I could direct to my students if I weren't so consumed by fear and anger and anxiety. I mourn the fact that a job that I love, teaching in a state that I love, in a city that I love, with students that I love, doesn't feel safe. And I mourn the fact that nobody seems to care about our lives enough to do something about it. I mourn every person that will die because our political leaders are too afraid to piss off a small portion of our population and mandate masks indoors and allow us to mandate vaccines in our classrooms. I mourn the fact that we seem to elect cowards. And I mourn the fact that they will be safe. And we, the people who are trying to take care of one another, are not.